Bronze does not lie. That is the first thing they teach you in the founding shed before they let you near a face, and it is the last thing I understood after 30 years of casting men who were already dead. Stone forgives a clumsy hand. Paint can be wiped. But bronze holds whatever you give it, true or false, forever. And on the morning of the unveiling, I stood in the cold sculpture court of the Verage Gallery and watched a soldier in a red tunic look up at a wall of faces I had spent 4 years building, and I learned that the most honest thing in that whole square was not my work. It was him. I am a sculptor. My name will not matter to this story, and that is the way it should be, because the names that matter are cast into the bronze and not signed at the bottom of it. For 4 years, the realm had asked me to make a memorial to the Hollow Company, a regiment of the King's Own that had marched out 2 generations back to hold a mountain pass against a force that should have rolled over them in an hour, and held it for 3 days, and died there almost to the last man, so that a valley full of ordinary people behind them could empty out and live. There were no photographs of most of them. There was a muster roll, brittle and water-stained, and there were the memories of a handful of very old people, and there was a single faded company portrait taken on the day they marched, in which the faces were the size of grains of rice. From that, I had to build 140 men. I did not make statues of them. Statues are for generals. I made a wall. It stood 11 feet high and 40 feet long, a great bronze relief of faces, 140 of them, shoulder to shoulder, rank behind rank, the way they would have stood at the pass. Not heroic faces, not chins lifted to glory. I had refused that from the start, and it had nearly cost me the commission. I gave them the faces of men who are tired and cold, and have decided to stand anyway. A few looking out at you, most looking past you at the thing they were watching for. A young one with his mouth a little open as if he had been about to speak. An old sergeant near the center whose jaw was set in the particular way of a man who has already counted the cost and paid it in his head. I wanted a person standing in front of that wall to feel what those people in the valley had felt. That between them and the end of everything there had stood only these men, and that the men had known it and had not run. The unveiling was set for the first morning of the autumn remembrance, in the sculpture court that opens off the great square in the heart of the capital, where the public could come and go. There would be a King's Guard honor party. There would be the old people, the descendants, the few living threads back to the Hollow Company. There would be speeches, which I dreaded, and a sheet of gray cloth 40 feet wide that would come down off the bronze, which I dreaded more, because 4 years of a man's life come down with a sheet like that, and you find out in a single second whether you have done the thing or only spent the time. I had been awake since 2. I had walked the empty court 3 times before the light came, running my hand along the cold lower edge of the relief where no one would look. The way you check a child's coat is buttoned before you send him out. And as the gray turned to silver in the high windows, the honor party marched in. There were 8 of them and a sergeant. I want to be exact about this, because everything that mattered turned on a thing most of the people there never saw. They came in from the colonnade in slow time, boots striking the stone in a single sound, red tunics dark in the morning shadow, bearskins making them taller than men, white gloves, the brass on their belts catching what little light there was. They wheeled and halted and faced the shrouded wall, and the sergeant placed them, 4 to a side of the great gray sheet, himself at the center. And then they became what they are trained to become, which is furniture, which is architecture, which is stone that breathes. I had seen guardsmen before. Everyone has. You stop noticing them the way you stop noticing the railings. But I was a man who had spent 4 years studying stillness. What it costs a face to hold a thing, what it does to the set of a shoulder to carry a weight you are not allowed to put down. And so, I watched the sergeant the way another man might watch a fire, and I saw at once that he was not like the others. The others were young, disciplined, immaculate, but young. Their stillness was the stillness of effort, of counting, of holding a posture they had been drilled into. His was different. His stillness was the stillness of a man who had stopped fighting the standing a long time ago, who had made his peace with being a fixed point in a moving world, and there is no drill that gives you that. You only get it from years, from the kind of years that leave a thing behind your eyes. He was perhaps 50, iron gray at the temple where the chin strap crossed, a long old scar, thin and white, along the line of the jaw, the kind a man gets young and carries forever. And on his breast, among the bright ribbons, two that were faded almost to no color at all, older than the others, that I did not recognize and that I would later learn most people in the realm would not recognize either, because they had not been awarded in a long time. I did not think anything of it then. I went and stood where the gallery's director told me to stand, off to one side with the descendants, and I waited for the speeches to be over so the sheet could come down and I could find out who I was. The speeches were what speeches are. A minister spoke about valor and sacrifice and the dead of the living, and the words were true and meant nothing, the way true words do when there are too many of them. An old historian spoke about the past and the 3 days, and that was better because he had numbers, and numbers do not lie either. He said that of the 140 men of the Hollow Company who marched to the pass, 4 came back. He said that the valley behind them had held, at the lowest count anyone could make, 11,000 people, farmers and weavers and the very old and the very young, and that all 11,000 had walked out alive over a road the company had bought them with 3 days. He said, 140 for 11,000. He let that sit. It was the only moment in the speeches when the court went truly quiet, and I saw the sergeant's eyes, which had been fixed on the middle distance the whole time, move once, just once, toward the shrouded wall, and then back. Then it was time. The director took her place at the rope. The honor party came to attention, a single hard crack of 8 pairs of heels and the sergeant's, that rang off the high stone and made an old woman near me startle and then laugh at herself and put her hand over her mouth. The minister said the few words you say, and the gray sheet came down. I have stood at a few unveilings. There is always a sound, an indrawn breath, a murmur, sometimes, if you are lucky, applause. That morning there was none of it. The sheet slid down the bronze and pooled on the stone, and the wall stood revealed in the silver light. 140 men looking out of the metal at the people who had come to look at them, and the court went silent in the particular way. A room goes silent when something has happened that no one has a prepared response to. I heard a single sob, quickly stifled, somewhere behind me. I heard the old historian, who had seen the maquettes and the casting and thought he was prepared, make a small sound and stop. And then I made myself look at the honor party, because a sculptor at his own unveiling does not get to watch the faces he made. He has to watch the faces that are watching them, because those are the only ones that tell him the truth. The 8 young guardsmen held. Their eyes were forward, fixed at the regulation point, and they did not look at the wall because they were not permitted to, and they had the discipline not to. I remember being moved by that, by 8 young men standing absolutely still with a wall of their own dead 2 yards behind their shoulders, not allowed to turn and see it. The sergeant was looking at the wall. He should not have been. I understood even then, with no military knowledge at all, that a sergeant at the head of an honor party does not turn his head and study the thing he is guarding. He holds his front like the rest of them. But his head had come around slowly, the smallest possible movement, no more than a few degrees, and his eyes had gone up the bronze and found a place in it, high on the wall and a little left of center, and they had stopped there. I followed his gaze. I knew that wall better than I knew my own face. I knew exactly which man he was looking at. He was looking at the young one, the one with his mouth a little open, as if he had been about to speak. The one I had built from nothing, from a rice grain of face in a faded portrait, and the single line in the muster roll that gave a name and an age and the word killed. I had given that one more of my own invention than almost any other on the wall, because there was so little to go on. I had made up the set of his ears and the line of his brow, and the particular open look of a young man who has not yet learned that some things you do not get to say. I had been a little ashamed of him privately, because he was the most invented man on the wall, the one I had the least right to. And a 50-year-old sergeant of the King's Guard was looking up at that invented face as though it had spoken his name. I want to be careful here, because what happened next happened slowly and quietly, and almost no one in that crowded court saw it. And I have spent the years since making sure I tell it exactly and add nothing, because the worst thing I could do to that man is improve his grief. He did not break, understand that first. Whatever you are imagining, a cry, a stagger, a hand going to the face, none of it happened. He was a King's Guard, and the discipline of a lifetime held him the way the bronze held my faces, completely. His body did not move. His rifle did not waver. His feet stayed planted in the spot the drill had given him. To the minister at the rope, to the cameras of the press along the colonnade, to the 11,000 descendants of 11,000 saved people who would see the photographs that evening, he was a flawless soldier rendering flawless honor, motionless as the wall behind him. But I was watching his face, and his face was not motionless, and what it was doing was the most disciplined thing I have ever seen a human being do. It was holding. Not holding still, holding. There is a difference, and I had spent 4 years learning to see it, and I saw it then. A man holds still when nothing is happening inside him. This man was holding a thing that was very large and was trying to come out, and he was using everything he had to keep it in, because to let it out would be to fail the dead, and he would die before he failed the dead. His jaw, with its thin old scar, was set the way I had set the old sergeant's jaw at the center of the wall, and I understood with a cold drop in my stomach that I had not invented that expression after all. I had cast it without knowing where it came from. It came from men like this. I had been making faces I did not understand for 4 years, and one of the men who understood them had just walked into my court and stood at the foot of my wall. His eyes fixed on the young man with the open mouth, filled. They did not spill. He did not blink them clear, because to blink would have spilled them, and a tear running down a guardsman's face in front of the cameras at a state occasion is a thing his discipline would not permit, not because he was ashamed of it, but because the mourning was not about him. So he simply held his eyes open and full, looking up at the invented face of a young soldier, while the water stood in them and did not fall, and the iron of his whole training kept it from falling, and the cost of that, the cost of not letting it fall, was written in the white of his knuckle on the rifle and in the single muscle that stood out along his jaw. I did the only thing a man like me could do. I stopped breathing, and I memorized him, the way I had memorized 140 dead men, because I knew I was looking at something I would have to understand later. The mourning went on around him. The minister stepped back. The director invited the descendants forward to the wall, and they came, the old ones first, slow, on canes and on the arms of the young. They walked along the bronze, reading the small names cast at the base, finding the men they had come for, laying their hands flat on the cold metal as if to warm it. An old woman found a face high up and stood under it with her chin trembling and could not reach it, and a young guardsman, one of the 8, breaking nothing, simply doing what a decent man does, took the wreath from her hands and set it at the base beneath the face she could not reach, and stepped back to his place, and her granddaughter wept, and the old woman did not, because she had done her weeping 50 years ago and had only come to say hello. And through all of it, the sergeant held his front and held his eyes and held the thing inside him, and I do not think more than 3 people in that whole court knew that the most honored man at the unveiling of the memorial to the Hollow Company was standing at the foot of it grieving. I had to know who the young man was. You will understand that I had to. I found him after, when the court had emptied of all but the staff and the last few descendants, and the honor party had marched out the way it came, 8 young men and 1 old one, boots in a single sound, the sergeant's face once more the face of architecture. I went to the gallery director and asked, as casually as I could manage, whether she knew the name of the sergeant who had commanded the party. She did not. She gave me the name of the regimental adjutant who had arranged the honors, and I wrote to him that afternoon. And I will tell you now that it took me 3 weeks and 4 letters, and a favor called in by the old historian before anyone would tell me anything at all, because they protect their men, those people, and a sculptor asking questions about a sergeant's private grief is exactly the kind of thing they are right to refuse. What broke it open was the 2 faded ribbons. I had described them to the adjutant in one of my letters. 2 ribbons older than the rest, almost colorless, near the bottom of the row, and asked, more out of a sculptor's eye for detail than anything, whether he could tell me what they were. He wrote back a short letter that did not answer most of my questions, but answered that one. And the answer changed the shape of everything I thought I had seen. The older of the 2 ribbons, he wrote, was a campaign class from the mountain frontier. It was not awarded anymore. It had not been awarded in over 30 years because there had been no more campaigns on that frontier. The pass had been quiet for a generation. The men who held that clasp were old men now, or dead. The sergeant who had commanded my honor party was, the adjutant wrote, one of the last serving soldiers in the entire King's Own to hold it. He had earned it as a very young man, in the last action ever fought at the mountain pass, the same pass where, 2 generations before him, the Hollow Company had died. The pass had been quiet for a generation, but it had not always been quiet, and the last time it had not been quiet, this man had been there. I read the letter standing up in my studio with the casts of 140 dead men around me, and I sat down. It took the 4th letter, and the old historian going in person, to get the rest, and even then we got it not from the regiment but from the sergeant himself, who, when he understood that a sculptor had seen what he had done and was not going to print it but only wanted to understand it, agreed to meet me. He came to my studio on a gray afternoon, out of uniform, in a plain coat, and without the bearskin he was just a tall straight man of 50 with a scarred jaw and quiet eyes, and he stood among my casts for a long time before he said anything, walking slowly down the rows of faces I was still working on, the men who had not made it onto the Great Wall, the spares and the studies. Then he told me about the young man with the open mouth. His name had been Aeld. He was not, the sergeant told me at once, a man of the Hollow Company. He could not have been. The Hollow Company had died 2 generations before either of us was born. I had built the young face on the wall from a name and an age in a muster roll, and I had got the face wrong, of course. I had got all of them at least a little wrong, because I had been inventing, but I had got something else, something I had no right to get and could not have known I was getting. I had got the look. The young man with the open mouth, the most invented face on my wall, the one I had been ashamed of, I had given him, by pure accident, out of nothing but 4 years of staring at the faces of soldiers, and trying to feel my way into the thing they carry, the exact expression of a real boy named Aeld who had stood beside this sergeant at the mountain past 30 years before and had not come back. It was the mouth, the sergeant said. He said it quietly, the way he said everything, and he did not look at me when he said it. He looked at one of my unfinished casts. You made him with his mouth a little open, like he was about to say something. Aeld was always about to say something. He was 19. He never stopped talking on the march, on watch, in his sleep. The rest of us used to throw boots at him. The last thing, he stopped. He was a man who had learned in a lifetime of standing still exactly how to stop a sentence before it cost him too much, and he stopped that one and started another. The last morning before the action he was talking. I don't even remember what about. Something foolish. He had his mouth open like that, like your boy, like he was about to tell me something. And then the order came and we went up, and he never finished it. And he never came down. And I have spent 30 years not knowing what he was going to say. I did not say anything. There was nothing for a man like me to say to a man like that, and I had the sense, at least, to know it. And then I walk into your court, he said, to render honors to 140 men from before my grandfather's time. A job. A good job and honor to do it, but a job I'd done 40 like it. And the sheet comes down, and there he is, 30 feet up in the bronze, with his mouth open, about to say something. After 30 years. He turned and looked at me then, and his quiet eyes were steady, and I understood that the holding I had watched him do at the unveiling was a thing he could do for as long as he had to, forever if he had to, and that it had cost him then and was costing him now and would go on costing him, and that he paid it without complaint because the alternative was to let the dead down, and he would not do that. You weren't making Ailed, he said. You couldn't have been. You'd never heard of him. But you made him. That's the thing I can't get past. You made a boy you never knew, out of a different war, and you gave him Ailed's face because, and here, for the first time, his voice did a small thing, a catch, instantly mastered, because I think a frightened 19-year-old who's about to say something he'll never get to finish looks the same in any war. You found it. You found the true thing without knowing it was true. That is the heart of it. That is what I have been trying to tell you. I had set out to make a wall of strangers, and I had been so afraid that I was inventing them, putting my own guesses where their real faces should be, that I had nearly given up the commission twice. And it turned out that the thing I was afraid of the inventing had carried me past the strangers and into something underneath them, something all those men shared, whether they died at the past 2 generations ago or 30 years ago, or had not died at all, but only stood in red tunics at the foot of a wall remembering. The fear, the cold, the boy who is about to speak and will not get to finish. I had been so worried about getting the men right that I had accidentally got the men true, and the difference between right and true is the whole of my trade, and I had not known it until a sergeant told me. But there was more, and the more is why I am telling you any of this. Because the sergeant had not only recognized the face, he had done something with the recognition in the long-held minutes of the unveiling that I had watched without understanding, and that I understood now. Cast yourself back to the court with me. The sheet has come down. The sergeant has found Ailed's face 30 feet up in the bronze, the boy with the open mouth, and his eyes have filled and not spilled. The descendants are coming forward to lay their wreaths, and there is a moment I saw it and did not know what I was seeing, when the honor party must render the formal salute to the memorial. This is the ceremonial heart of the thing. The minister steps clear, the director gives the word, and the 8 young guardsmen and their sergeant present arms to the wall of the dead. The rifles come up, the white gloves move in a single train motion, and the men salute 140 soldiers who held a pass before any of them were born. The sergeant gave that salute like every salute he had ever given, flawless, exact, the regulation movement at the regulation speed. To anyone watching, it was one of 9 identical salutes. It was not identical. I know now what it was. The regulation point of focus for a guard presenting arms is the front level, the middle distance. 8 young men held that point. The sergeant, in the instant of the salute, lifted his eyes. By the smallest degree, the human eye can lift and still be inside the bounds of the drill. A thing a man can only do if his discipline is so complete that he can spend a fraction of it on a private purpose, without spending so much that anyone sees. And he put the salute on Ailed. He saluted 140 men of the Hollow Company, as he was ordered to, with his body and his rifle and his flawless form. And inside that lawful salute, costing the realm nothing and the watching world nothing, seen by no camera and almost no living soul, he saluted one boy from a different war who had been about to say something 30 years ago and had not finished. He folded a private grief inside a public honor so perfectly that the two could not be told apart, and he rendered both at once, and he broke no rule doing it. The discipline that forbade him to grieve was the very thing that let him grieve, in the only language he had, the language of the salute, on the only occasion that would ever let him give it. I have thought about that more than I have thought about almost anything in my life. I make my living finding the true thing and freezing it where people can see it. He found the true thing and hid it where no one could see it, and the hiding was the honor. I had spent 4 years trying to make grief visible. He spent 11 seconds making it invisible, and his was the greater work. I'd never had a stone, he told me in my studio among the casts. There wasn't enough left of the action to bring anyone home properly. It was a small thing, that last fight at the pass, a border skirmish, a few dozen men, the kind of thing the histories give a sentence to. There's no memorial. There's no wall with his name on it. There's a line in a regimental roll, and there's me. For 30 years the only place Aeld was remembered was inside one man's head, and one day that man will fall off a wall somewhere or just get old and die, and then there'll be the line in the roll and nothing else. He looked up at me. And then I walk into your court, and there he is in bronze, 11 feet of him, lit up, with the whole realm coming to look at him. You didn't make him for him. You made him for someone 2 generations dead, but he's there. His face is there. And the morning your wall went up, for the first time in 30 years, somebody besides me saluted my boy. He stopped. The studio was very quiet. The cast stood around us in the gray light, 100 faces I had made and did not understand until that afternoon. I came to your court to honor strangers, he said, and the strangers honored mine. That's a thing I didn't know could happen. I didn't know the dead could pay each other's debts. I am not a man who weeps easily, and I had held myself through the whole conversation, the way I imagined he would want me to, plainly, without performance. But that undid me, that last thing, and he saw it, and he did me the kindness of looking away, out the high window, while I got myself back. The way he had got himself back at the unveiling, and I understood, getting myself back under his patient averted gaze. A small fraction of what it must take to do what he did every day on every post, for a lifetime. There is a thing I have to tell you now that the sergeant did not tell me, because he would not have, because it would have looked like asking to be thanked, and he would rather have stood another 30 years than ask to be thanked. I learned it from the adjutant, in the last letter, the one that finally told me everything. At the action at the pass, 30 years ago, the order had been given to fall back. The position was lost. Staying meant dying for nothing. The colonel called the men down off the high ground, and in the falling back, in the smoke and the noise, a section of very young soldiers had been cut off on the wrong side of a gully, Aeld among them, too far forward, not hearing the order, still holding a line that no longer needed holding. And a young soldier, 18 then, the man who would be my sergeant, had gone back up, against the order, against the falling back. Because he could see the cut-off section, and they could not see that everyone else had gone, and he could not leave them up there not knowing. He reached them. He turned most of them. He got them moving down toward the gully and the safe ground beyond it. But Aeld, who was always about to say something, had gone the wrong way in the smoke, up instead of down, the way a frightened 19-year-old does, and by the time the young soldier saw it, it was a choice. The section, who could still be saved, or the one boy, who probably could not. And a soldier does not get to make that choice with his heart. He made it with the thing they had built in him for exactly that moment, the thing that lets a man do the unbearable arithmetic. And he took the section down, the many over the one, and he left Aeld on the high ground, alive, still moving, still, God help him, probably still talking, and he never saw him again. That was the medal, the faded ribbon, the second of the two, the one the adjutant told me about in the last letter. They gave him a decoration for going back up the hill and saving the section. He had worn it for 30 years, and every day that he wore it, it had also been the mark of the boy he did not save, the one he had to leave, the arithmetic he had done correctly and would never forgive himself for, because correct and forgivable are not the same thing, any more than right and true are. So when he walked into my court and the sheet came down and there was Aeld, 11 feet tall in the bronze, with his mouth open, about to say the thing he never finished, you understand now. You understand what the holding cost him. It was not only grief for a friend 2 generations, and 1 generation folded into a single boy's open mouth. It was the man who had left him, standing at the foot of a wall, being saluted by the realm as a hero, with the one face he could never put down looking down at him out of the metal, and he had to render flawless honor to 140 strangers, while the only soldier in the world he owed a debt he could not pay watched him do it. And he did. He rendered it flawless. That is the whole point. That is the thing I had spent 4 years trying and failing to put into bronze, and a sergeant put it into 11 seconds of a salute and a held face, and I did not have the skill to make it, and he did not have the choice not to. I made one more thing after that. It was not commissioned. No one asked for it, and I did not ask anyone's leave, which for a public sculptor is close to a crime, and I did not care. The mountain pass had a small forgotten action 30 years ago that the histories give a sentence to. A few dozen men. No memorial, no wall, no stone for a boy named Aeld who was always about to say something. I had a studio full of bronze and 40 years of skill, and a debt I had taken on the gray afternoon the sergeant walked down my rows of casts, and I knew exactly what to do with all 3. I made a stone, a real one, low and plain, the kind you can kneel at. Not a wall. Aeld did not need a wall. He was already on a wall 2 generations early by an accident that turned out to be the truest thing I ever did. He needed the other thing, the thing the hollow company had, and he did not. A name in the open air, in a place a man could come to. So I cut the names of the cut-off section into the stone, all of them. The saved and the one not saved, with Aeld's among them and not above them, because he had told me, when I asked, carefully, whether Aeld should be set apart, that no, he should not, that Aeld would have hated to be set apart, that the whole of Aeld was that he was one of them, one more talking frightened boy in a line of them, and that the honor was to be remembered as one of the line and not lifted out of it. So I set him in the line. And at the foot of the stone, where you cannot see it unless you kneel, which is the only posture in which a man should read it anyway, I cut a single sentence, and I did not sign it, and I will tell it to you because it is the only thing in this whole account that is mine. He was about to say something. I gave the stone to the regiment. They set it at the foot of the mountain pass, on the safe side of the gully, on the ground the section reached because a young soldier went back up the hill. And on the first morning of the next autumn remembrance, a sergeant of the King's Guard, iron gray at the temple, with a thin old scar along his jaw and 2 faded ribbons no one else could read, came to the pass on his own leave, in his own time out of uniform, and knelt at a low plain stone, and read a sentence at the foot of it that only a kneeling man can see, and rendered, for the first time in 30 years, in a place where the boy's name now stood in the open air. The salute he had been folding into other men's honors his whole life. I was not there. He told me about it later in 2 lines, the way he told everything, and then he never spoke of it again, and I have honored that until now. I have made a great many memorials in my life. People stop me sometimes in front of the wall in the sculpture court, and they want to talk about the 140 faces, the craft of them, how I made men I never knew look so alive in dead metal. And I let them think it was craft, because it is easier, and because the truth is not mine to give away in a gallery on a Tuesday. But the truth is that I did not make those men look alive. I only stared at the faces of soldiers long enough that, by an accident I have never been able to repeat, I caught the one thing that is the same in all of them across every war, the cold, the fear, the boy about to speak, and froze it where it could be seen. And then a soldier walked in who carried that same true thing in the flesh, alive, every day, under a flawless red tunic, and stood at the foot of my wall and showed me that the bronze was the cheaper version. The dear version, the real one, the one that costs a life to make, walks among us in white gloves and a bearskin and is trained to make sure we never see it. That is what I learned in the cold court the morning the sheet came down. Not that art remembers the dead, it does, a little, in a thin metal way. But the living remember them better, and the best of the living remember them in silence, holding a thing they are not allowed to put down, paying a debt they cannot clear, rendering honor with a face that does not move while everything behind it does. I made a wall so the realm would not forget 140 men. The realm needed the wall, but the 140 men, and the boy from the other war who is not on it, were never going to be forgotten. Not really. Not while there was one old sergeant left alive who could fold them into a salute and carry them up a hill in his head every morning of his life. The bronze does not lie. I told you that at the start. But I had it backward all those years, and the sergeant said it right without ever meaning to. The bronze does not lie, but it does not bleed either. It holds the face and not the cost. The cost is held somewhere the metal cannot reach. Behind the eyes of a man standing perfectly still, in the white of a knuckle on a rifle, in 11 seconds of a salute aimed by a single forbidden degree at a boy who is about to say something and never will. I cast men for a living. He carried one for a lifetime. And on the morning my wall went up, I finally understood which of us was the sculptor.